Yeah. So during that time, like a little bit of background, I played sports all growing up. I was a high level water polo player in high school, all American water polo player and swimmer in high school. Played in college, so I'm pretty accustomed to like a decent, pretty significant amount of just volume of work.
Yeah.
And so for like the first few months of like this year, I was stuck on like the whole only train 3 days a week, which I don't think is a bad thing, but
Yeah, for sure.
um, I wanted to do more and I wanted to train further. And I just started reading some things. And like the guy who probably has had the biggest influence on me has been Jason Ferrugia.
Right.
Like I said last time, I think he's far and away one of the. Actually, I'm going to say he knows the most about the whole training and nutrition scheme out there that's accessible.
Right.
But his whole thing is train as much as you can allow you to recover. So if you can train 4 days a week and recover, then do it. But his thing is that I think people will benefit more from 6 45-minute sessions a week rather than 3 hour-and-a-half sessions a week, which I think is totally true.
Right.
So what I've been doing is I do an upper lower split 4 days a week, and then I have 2 days of sprints or conditioning,
Right.
and then I take one day completely off. And then if I'm feeling good on the like days where I'm doing an upper or lower, at the end I might throw in like a little conditioning 5 to 10 minute quick lighter weight like metabolic work.
Yeah.
But I very rarely is ever going to go above 10 to 15 minutes. Try to keep it in like the 5 to 7 range just to get a little bit extra something, and that's only if I'm feeling really good. And if I had like a bad workout or like I kind of felt flat, I skip it because I don't need it.
Yeah.
For me, my goal is like I'm not looking to win a marathon or train for a triathlon. I just want to be a big, strong, good athlete.
Sure.
So I don't really need to go into the high aerobic capacity range.
Well, and last time we talked about, how you schedule your nutrition around that. And I believe you mentioned that during your HIIT sessions or the hill sprints or whatever, that you do those as deficit days or kind of a lower calorie days,
Yeah.
and you use your workout days as higher calorie days.
Yeah. So my theory is that like your training should dictate what you're going to take in nutritionally. Just makes sense. Like if food is fuel and food is going to be like is going to be a big part of like the signaling and the messaging system, it only makes sense that you should tailor your nutrition to whatever you're doing to get the optimal gains or losses or whatever your goal is. And so, for example, on the 4 days a week when I lift weights, those are my high carb days, which makes sense because I'm breaking down or sending the greatest stimulus to build muscle on those days.
Yeah.
And on the high intensity days, I'll go a little bit lower carb and lower calorie just because I'm not necessarily breaking things down as much. I mean, I'm working hard on those days, but once again, it's a short workout.
Yeah. It's a
And
different feeling for sure.
exactly, you're not
Yeah.
really you're. There's a difference between being out of breath and being beaten up. And on
Yeah.
those days, I'm mainly getting out of breath, and yeah, like my legs are like tired afterwards, but I'm never really sore the day after those ones, and so I'll go moderate on carbs on those days and a little bit lower calories just to kind of get like a middle ground to make sure that I'm not depleted going into weights later in the week, but also to make sure that it's
Well, that does get back to the performance thing. I think when you have performance as the guide, right?
exactly,
That
exactly,
that really dictates the food so much,
exactly. And
and
I think this is another thing that I see is that people get so caught up in tweaking the diet and focusing on nutrition because I
right.
mean, yes, like it is very very important, but to a certain extent, if you're just not eating dumb stuff, like that's good if you're not eating things that are inflaming your system a lot,
Yeah.
focusing on the training, I think, would do a lot more for people.
Well, and we talked a little bit about like the if it fits your macros approach, and I think we both agree that hey, that works, and you could do it that way, and to a certain extent, I would say my approach kind of fits that, though I don't really count, and I know that type of system is really high in counting.
Yeah.
Um, but you talked a little bit last time about how if you're eating a bunch of donuts or Pop Tarts or whatever, that it just doesn't make you feel the way that you
Yeah.
want to feel going into workouts. I don't know what happened, but we got a little wonky here. This is not good.
Yeah, I mean, like my number one. Yeah, no, I know. I think I know what you're getting at there. Not necessarily body composition, but like there's certain strength goals and athleticism goals that I have,
Yeah.
and in order for me to achieve them, I need to be putting things into my body that are going to do well. And like I notice, like if I crush or if I eat like a bunch of donuts or like something that just like doesn't sit well with me,
Yeah.
like not only will I like not really feel that well that day, but my training will suffer the next few days. Where like I'm either lacking focus or kind of feeling fat or just feeling off when I'm training, and so I don't like feeling like that. I don't like wasting training days in like a submaximal state. So for me, like it's just I just kind of stay away from that stuff because I know that it's not putting me in a good position. And if I'm like really craving it or like really want it, then yeah, I'll go. But I've had enough time eating less than ideal stuff and then seeing how it affects training to know that like it's not really worth it to me. And for somebody who's
I will say this though. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that, and some of the days that I've had. I mean, yes, if you eat 2 pints of Ben and Jerry's,
exactly
it's going to bug you. But like yesterday, as an example, there really wasn't a lot of food options, so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna have a Big Mac and a Coke. I mean, it wasn't like it affected my life. I didn't suddenly want to start eating bad foods left and right. And I think that's sort of where everybody thinks that, you know, um,
yeah.
it had been a while since I'd had a Big Mac. It had been a while since I'd had a Coke, so I didn't feel particularly guilty one way or the other doing it. But I think to a lot of people that it gets to be sort of a mental thing and almost sort of OCD, you know.
Yeah. Well,
I think the video is actually getting a little choppy, and sometimes it's kind of actually messing with the audio a little bit too, Jack. So we may.
you're good now. You're good now. It skipped a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a fine line, like it. But what I think is that the whole, like, if you're having, like a day of good, solid, I mean, we all know, like, real food, and then you have like a Big Mac or like some French fries or some cookies as like a small portion of your total daily intake, then yeah, that's fine. But what I do think is that it's really easy to let that snowball to where
That's true. I agree with that.
Like 200, like we'll say 10% becomes 15%, becomes 20%, becomes like 30% of your intake becomes now I'm having protein powder and Pop Tarts as like my whole.
Right. I mean, to give you an example, and I know that this approach is really, really difficult because when you're used to being lean or you're trying to maintain a certain level of body composition, and then you start to go up in calories or go up in weight, that can actually be difficult mentally, right?
For sure.
And to a certain extent, I think the Lean Gains protocol does lend itself to like people with eating disorders and things of that nature. And one of the guys that used to be pretty active in our group, but I know more personally, and we talk out of the group more than we do in the group. And he's recently put on 20 pounds in about 2 months.
I think I know exactly what you're talking about too.
Yeah, and it's not, I always hate when people are snobby about their level of fitness or the way that they eat compared to the way that other people eat, because people are just trying to do what's best or what they think is right, you know. Um, but in my instance, I've added a little bit of weight with being a little bit more conscious approach to that. You know, that's not to say his approach won't be better than mine in the long term. I mean, if he's able to gain 15 pounds of muscle, I just think it's really hard to do that. But it'll be interesting to see how it works out for him. That is a traditional bulking cutting cycle, whereas mine is a little bit more. I don't need to do it immediately, I guess, is sort
Yeah,
of the thing.
exactly. I think you can either do it. Yeah, I mean, there's only so much new, legitimate muscle, protein, fibrous tissue that you can synthesize in a given time,
Right.
and yeah, I mean, you can really push the limits and handle some back end and then drop off the fat. I mean, yeah, to each their own. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And
Yeah, I
whatever's
mean,
going to make you happy. Like, there's a lot to be, like, if I would much rather see somebody maintain 12% and be really happy with their life and be feeling great and in a really good spot than struggling and sacrificing to maintain 7% or something like that. Like, there's a lot to be said for being happy. And I think that that's the one thing that I want to emphasize is that do what you like.
yeah, I mean, kind of getting back to, because you're saying 12%. We're not even talking about 12% here. We're talking about 20%.
Yeah.
I mean, when you gain that amount of fat, that amount of muscle, um, you have to be really committed to that type of strategy. And I mean, your strategy obviously was to try and get to a real low percentage, and then now you're ultimately going to do kind of a slower bulking type of scenario. And I just, whether you're doing P90X or CrossFit or bodybuilding or eating paleo or if it fits your macros or whatever, all of those things can work given the right circumstances. And
Exactly.
and I think that in general, I think a lot of people are going to look at this video, or lack of video actually in this instance, and go, well, I'm going to do what Jack did, you know, and I think that's the wrong approach.
You should do what I did in the sense of finding something that is sustainable for you and that you like. Like
Yeah.
I love the way that I get to train and like all that stuff. So
Yeah, I mean,
that
like in the instance of the person that we were talking about, you know, I mean, one of the things that's really been interesting to me lately, and they talk about this in the Supervicity blog, or I don't even know how to.
subversity. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
the is building your metabolic engine, and
Boom.
we had so many people that were coming at us early on talking about lean gains, and some other strategies that involve like hyper low calorie type of situations. And I remember thinking, man, this is really not the direction that I want to go with anyone,
Yeah.
because there really is a level where you can only go so low, and it's going to really hurt you metabolically, hormonally.
For a
Um,
long time.
yeah. I mean, it's going to really derail your situation. Now, don't get me wrong. People have traditionally body built and then, come down. But like even a bodybuilder who's doing something really super restrictive, usually it's in a smaller window of 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, we've had a lot of people that were coming at me that were saying, 8 to 10 weeks. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna be doing it, like it's just you can't like 8 to 10 weeks of like 16 to 1800 a day as a guy, as like a 23-year-old male, like, and then they're coming in and saying like, oh, well now like I'm starving all the time and my libido's down and I can't like I'm suffering in workouts. Like, yeah, you're eating enough for a 5'3"